I'm just getting ready to put the carb bodies back together on the Honda CBR 900RR, and there is a sequence to rebuilding these bodies, and since I didn't find a video on the internet that had the sequence, I'm going to show you how to do it. Assuming you've split your carbs and cleaned them, first things first, getting them in the right orientation, so making sure that they all fit together and that the throttle can control all the butterfly valves. Good start, just don't mix them up like I might have. And then I'm going to suggest that you put the choke in each carb to start with. And the reason I suggest that is once these carb bodies are next to each other, you're not going to have very much space to insert the choke controls. So do that for each of the carb bodies. Because these caps are plastic, I prefer to screw them in by hand. As you can see there, it's starting to cross thread. And then I just nip them up with a screwdriver attachment. Now, when I say nip them up, I'm really just giving them a little tweak, okay? And then make sure that your choke functions properly. Once you get your chokes installed, and assuming you haven't mixed them up, you'll notice that they are lovely. There's no pinching, everything's super smooth. If you have mixed them up, I would suggest you just spend a little bit of time figuring out which one goes in where, because they do wear, and it takes a micron here and a micron there. I've kept all mine separate, so they work really, really well. There's also a spring, so although you have a spring for the adjustment, there is a spring that goes between the paddle on this side and the paddle on this side. And so what will happen when I put these together is I'm going to pull this spring back a little, and what that is it just counteracts some of the backlash between the paddles. So for instance, if you have two pieces of metal together, like these two paddles here, and you don't have a spring, as far as the throttle is concerned, it will feel like there's a notch before it engages, and as you roll off, you'll feel that notch again. So I don't have 4 springs for some reason, I only have 2. So I'm putting a spring on carb 4 and carb 1, because 2 and 3, they seem quite happy together. I should have got more of these, but couldn't really find them on the internet. So, and I've rummaged around and everything, so I've only got 2, so I'm rebuilding with 2. The next issue you're going to come across is fuel. So we're going to have a fuel pipe going in here. Then we're going to have a breather pipe going in here. And then I've got to bring the 2 carb bodies together whilst pulling this spring back so that the paddle can go between that paddle and the spring. Again, that's that backlash thing going on. And also make sure I don't damage the edge of this, and try and bring them together neatly. Wish me luck. Okay, it's a bit of a better camera angle for you all. So I'm going to take carb 4 and I'm going to install the fuel T-piece. So it's going to come in and under. Watch out, if you've got it the wrong way round, you'll know. So I'm just going to make mine the wrong way round, okay? And you'll think this is all going really, really well, but you'll see that the clip will then obscure the float bowl, okay? So getting the right way around, I've put rubber lube over the O-rings. Pop it in, you don't have to get it out, it just should go in nice and smooth. Now you've got your fuel line on, we're looking at air. Carb 4, air goes like that. Right, so it kind of, if you can imagine, it's kind of going off doing its own thing. Right, that's upward orientation. All right. Now the fun part is bringing these carbs together and making sure that not only the fuel T-pieces, but the air T-pieces, that round, the round piece I've got there, all comes together. Hopefully you're seeing that. And also that spring, I think you can quite see it in there, but that paddle is about to hit the center of the spring. So I need to sort that out before I try wiggling these carbs together. Ebony and ivory. All I was doing there was just wiggling the fuel T-piece just to make sure that everything's kind of feeding in. I don't want to rip those O-rings, right? Okay, that's 3 and 4 together. And now all I have to do is get a spring in between these two paddles here, which I can probably do a lot easier if I do that. So if I hold, now that I've removed the spring, I've got a better technique. I'm going to hold the butterfly open on carb body 4, and there's my gap, and that just looks really good for inserting the spring. Please don't be thinking, there we go, mine's just slid in. Please don't be thinking you'll just miss the spring out. It has a job. And again, it just takes away the backlash. If you don't use it, you're going to feel that on the throttle. So far so good. We've got no problem with the throttle stop. We've got air, fuel. We've got the join between the carbs, looking good. And if you, if you can just see in there's a little bit of rubber grease. I'm not going to be able to get to that without a Q-tip. And we'll move on to carb body 3. Just a quick look around the carb just to make sure nothing's going to interfere with the float bowls. For carb body 2 and 3, we're not going to use one of these pieces. We're actually going to use that T-piece, because that's going to come off with a tube to a filter. So that's going to go around about there. I did notice on my build there was a spring, and the spring was between the throttle and this side, but I never quite figured out why it was there, because it looks like it could theoretically come off, but I'm gonna install it anyway. On mine there were some spacers. I actually think I'll take these out. I ended up with 4 spacers. I think this spacer here goes at the back, and then it should all come together nicely. So let's just pop that spacer in there. I don't have to worry about the air or fuel. So let's try popping them together nicely. Yeah, so that large spacer at the back there has been really useful. Actually has a job. And I'm just going to wiggle them together. They haven't been back together in a little while, but I want to make sure that everything meets up. And you can see my T-piece there, it's just off to one angle, so I might need to, there we go. Wasn't so bad, was it? Give them all a bit of a wiggle, make them all come together. What I don't want to do is crush anything, and you'll notice I'm not using the 2 pins that hold the entire carb bodies together. I'm building it ad hoc. So just a little gap at the bottom there, but I'm sure if I work it enough we will overcome. Okay, we're looking good. So air, fuel. Be very cautious now. There we go. Air's in. And now between carb bodies 1 and 2, I've got another one of these. I'm just going to give it a little bit of rubber lube. And then if you look at the carbs themselves, you see the cutout is on carb 1. That matches there. And there's no cutout on carb 2. So I'm just going to rotate this until it fits the cutout. There we are. The last two pieces are these spacers. So I'll take carb 1, pop a spacer in, pop a spacer in. I'll do this tiny little spring on carb 1 once the bodies are all together, because as you saw between 3 and 4, it wasn't the easiest of tasks. So just taking my time now and making sure that the air and the fuel tube pieces meet their subsequent carb body nicely, and that everything starts to come together. I'd say don't push hard, just wiggle, just kind of like let them find their own way in. They haven't been back together in a little while. Just trying to figure out where my issue is, and my issue is just give it a rotate, gently push from a different angle. I think it's actually my my fuel tube piece just getting in there. I don't want to force anything. There we go. They just haven't been back together in a while. And there we are. Lovely. It's looking like a bank of carbs already, right? Now I'm going to fight with that spring between 1 and 2, and that spring's that backlash. We'll call it a backlash spring, shall we? Am I happy? Yeah. Does the throttle actuate? So if I move the throttle, does it actuate? Sure does. Does it feel good? It feels fantastic. It's at this point I'm going to put the pins through just to hold everything in place, and I'm going to hand tighten it. So this part for the choke cable goes to carb 4. There we go, pop it in. And it will sit up like that. Kind of sit up and beg. I suppose a good tip if you're into rebuilding carbs is to take photos. Yeah, so take a few photos before you disassemble if you've never taken that bank apart before. I'll just leave this one floppy because it's only hand tight. This is now a really good time to install these springs that go between the throttles themselves. For me, they're nice and easily compressible, so installation's much easier than the smaller springs. There we go. Before we tighten everything up, check the operation of the carbs. So on this occasion, I'm using one of my fingers to actuate the throttle as if you were doing it. And what you can see is 3 and 4, the butterfly valves are moving and nothing's happening to 1 and 2. So either I am missing something, we're going to find out. And so in my case, it's nothing more exciting than a missing spring. You know how much I love to put these in. And the missing spring is in there, right down there. Probably easier if I install it from the other side. Nothing's going to fall apart now that I've just hand nipped it together. So what I've done is I've just popped a socket 13mm socket into the butterfly valves just to hold it open. There's only spring tension on there, so it's not going to do any damage. And then here I am fighting that last spring. It needs to be so highly compressed because it's not getting it over one nub, it's getting it over two. And you must persevere, you must not give up. You must have a collection of springs ready to replace this spring as it pings off into the workshop, never to be seen again. 20 hours later, no, 5 minutes later. Now, when the throttle actuates, try and get my thumb in the right place. But that spring was an absolute ball buster. It was no fun at all, so you need 3. Somehow my bike ended up with just 2, and I haven't lost any pieces. But maybe one of the banks there didn't have a spring. And now everything opens, beautiful synchronicity. And just as an update, if you don't have those springs, all 3 of them, you're in for a world of hurt because it's no longer available. I found 2 companies, one in Poland that won't sell to the UK and one in Australia that won't tell me what the postage charge is. So they went through the entire process to find out it was the best part of £60 plus VAT. Yeah, forget that. That's like a spring, a tiny, tiny little spring for the best part of 120 quid delivered. And you know, should you find a carb body or something like that, you can see the spring is missing here. So you'd actually have to buy a set of carbs in order to get that one spring. So yeah, word to the wise, when you're disassembling your carbs, don't lose any parts. If you don't have any of these little tiny springs, which are no longer in production, you could have some made for you. So you could look on the internet, for instance, and you'd want something with a wire diameter of 0.6mm. However, these days it's going to be 1mm diameter. You'd be hard pushed to get 0.6, so it'd be a bit thicker. And the outer diameter, this bit here, is 6mm, and the length is 10mm. So I'll put that in the description below. And if you look for compression spring with those diameters on eBay, Amazon, Google, you should find a seller that will give you a spring that's pretty close. So we're looking pretty good. I'd say at this point, it's a really good idea to torque up the nuts. I'm using a torque wrench, and I'm only going to choose like 4 Newton meters. You want to do them a little bit each, a little bit on each side, just to keep everything even. Let's rebuild the choke assembly. Spring goes between 3 and 4, and then this is the slider, which I just took a wire brush to. I'm going to take these nylon O-rings, the flat ones, and place them on the screw mounts. And then what happens is you got these like little top hats. Yeah? So the top hats will pop through and allow it all to slide. They've been doing a grand job for the last 30 odd years, so I don't see why they can't continue. You do put the spring on and you do pass the slider through the spring at 3 and 4. Quick check. I was really wanting to put the top hats on then, wasn't I? Quick check to make sure we have actuation. And then pop in your top hats. Don't lose them because they're actually really hard to come by. There's another part which is discontinued. This is a great time to use your JIS screwdriver. Or get your Phillips screwdriver and round everything off. Your choice. And then test it. Looking good, right? The only thing I might need to adjust is this nut here in order to bring the cable in line Let's install the velocity stacks. Effectively, you have a gasket, and you can see there are 3 paddles on the gasket, and they will meet with the 3 paddles that are cut out on the velocity stack. I know this is more a cosmetic thing, but I just wanted to do it because the carbs are going to start looking like carbs right now. So when the velocity stacks go in, the paddles themselves will be pushing against the gasket and holding it in place. And then you've got this, I don't know if it's like, it's kind of plastic, but it feels brittle like Bakelite. So velocity stack through, and then you might have to adjust the rotation of the velocity stack in order to fit into the inserts. So for instance here, there's a cutout on the stack in order to get it in, and you'll see it holds onto the paddles, but then getting it through here, you gotta rotate it. Four screws. No, it's only cosmetic, but I wanted to get this part done because it's exciting. That's looking proper, isn't it? Much better, I like. Now we're getting to the fun part. I'm only going to show you how to rebuild one of these carb bodies. No point in me showing you how to do the same thing 4 times over. So you're going to need to make sure that you've got your float pin, whatever jet you're going to use. You're going to need your emulsion tube that the jet goes into. You're going to need your pilot. And then you're going to need the 4 components that make for your idle control, which is going to be the little idler, its spring, a O-ring, and a metal O-ring washer. All right, let's get busy. Okay, let's get started. Pilot goes in to one side. And I'm just going to use a flat bladed screwdriver that's wider than the pilot to do it up. Now you'll notice I'm just doing it up. As for the emulsion tube, I'm going to screw it, feed it in by hand, just to show you it's threaded. And then once you're happy, use a 7mm to tighten that up. Check, yeah, 7mm. And then on top of the emulsion tube goes your beautifully clean, whoa, get out you. On top of your emulsion tube goes your beautifully clean, if you can see through that, jet. I hand thread everything, given how scarce parts are. And again, I'm using a snap-on screwdriver on this occasion, but it's going to be just slightly wider so that I don't end up chipping, because this is like some kind of crap material. There we go. Honda being like one of the top engineering companies, like they're really boring Hondas, but their engineering is amazing. Do you notice on this float there isn't a metal tab? There is no adjustment on these floats at all. What you have to do is literally take the needle that cuts off fuel, put it into the float, and it's set. Now on any other bike you have to set the float height, but not on this Honda. Everything is just preset, that's just how it is. And that's blown me away because it's the first time I've ever met it. And then I'm going to put the float pin through, assuming I can get it in the right hole. There we go. Float pin through. Beautiful. Let's talk pilot screws, my favourite. So you have a screw, which looks more like a needle. Then you're going to have a rubber O-ring, a metal washer, and then you're going to have a spring. On the left is the OEM spring, and on the right is what you get in aftermarket kits. Should you try using the spring on the right, which is the wrong length, it will interfere with the adjustment of the pilot screw. So if you end up in a situation where you've only got one spring, the others have all gone, you're going to need to cut this one down to be exactly the same size. Should you need to know the height of the OEM spring, it's 7.4 mil, but you could go 7.5. So I'm now going to cut this one down to the same size. It does have a bit of a tail on it, but to be expected. Since I only had 3 of the OEM springs, this one will make an adequate replacement. So when it comes to pilot screw, I'm not just going to drop it down, I'm going to put the carb on its side, and so I can insert it. And you should be able to start it by hand. And then help it out with a screwdriver. And now that's screwed all the way in. So for the UK, the pilot screw is 3 rotations out, half, 1, half, 2, half, 3. Right, I'm not going to bore you all with the rest of them, but I'll get on with that now. So I'm at a point now where I'm going to put the float bowl covers on, and I thought I'd talk about gaskets. So the float bowl on the left, I've refitted an old Honda gasket, and you can see that's going to fit a treat. And here comes the aftermarket gaskets, which aren't molded in the correct shape. And the whole point of this gasket is to stop petrol from leaking out. You see, as it doesn't fit very well, I'm having to do a lot of modifications. I also noticed that these aftermarket gaskets, if they touch petrol, they kind of either melt or expand, and the creators will tell you that there's a really good reason for that, and it's to stop petrol getting out. But if you ever have to remove a float bowl to check, you're going to ruin your gasket. So you can see this one doesn't fit particularly well. So how in the heck am I supposed to turn this upside down and fit it beautifully? It's not going to fit well, is it? So Honda gaskets all the way. Again, this is just an old one, and it was really just to show you the difference between the two and why these aftermarket kits, I'm being selective with the parts that I use from them and having to modify them because they are not to OEM standard. I'm really not digging these at all. Every time I get one bit right, the next bit doesn't wanna. I mean, even that corner's wrong. Look at that. What am I supposed to do? Just kind of stretch it in? I should email the manufacturer, right? And they'll say, oh, and without being rude to people with accents, and that they'll probably tell me to, like, a daub of super glue will hold that in place. It just doesn't fit very well, does it? And And in case you missed that, what I did was I held the carburetors upside down and raised the float bowl to the carb, and that meant the gasket couldn't fall out. So before we get stuck into vacuum sliders, the wonderful world of vacuum sliders, I'm just cleaning the needles off, or the tip of the needles, in some intake cleaner. This stuff, you don't want to breathe it in, you don't want to get it on your hands, you don't want to splash it in your eyes, and it's just a fascinating product. I think it's absolutely brilliant. It destroys carbon, and because of the tips of these needles, they've had fuel on them for a long, long time. It's turned into something rock hard, so it doesn't remove easily. So I'm just using that, a bit of a swill around. These needles will be good as new in a second. Welcome to the wonderful world of vacuum sliders. I happen to be very lucky because I have 4 brand new ones here, bought with my own money, kind of unobtainium. Not impossible, just really difficult to get to. These are the original vacuum sliders, and they've got a fair bit of wear on them. Excuse my wet hands. One of the issues I had was the diaphragms themselves. So they've got tiny, tiny little cracks in them, and that was only perceivable when I shone a bright light through them. So they're not brittle, but they're kind of hard, whereas these are soft and pliable, and so they're no good. However, in order to remove them from the vacuum sliders, it was quite a system. So here's a vacuum slider with the diaphragm on top. I'll make this look easy, right? Oh, me and diaphragms. Ooh. And then it would have this little cap on the top to hold it in place. So you can imagine one of the problems is if you were to remove this cap and you move the diaphragm even a slight bit, it wouldn't fit beautifully into the carb because there's a cutout for this. You've got to get you absolutely right. So I had to put a lot of heat here in order to get these to release, to get them off and disassemble everything. And I thought I'd reuse them, I'd just buy replacement diaphragms, but when I realized how impossible it was, not impossible, just a waste of time. So we have incredibly clean needles, and don't forget that needle's got to pass up into that emulsion tube, so we need them to be immaculate. They have their own little metal washers, and that helps with needle height adjustment, so we want to keep that as OEM as possible. So I'm just going to pass that down into one of the new vacuum sliders. There we go. And then something else I noticed when I was going to put this all together was these came out of the new vacuum sliders, and they're quite short. And these came out of the old ones. But the old ones have O-rings, yeah, and springs. Good. The new ones don't have springs or O-rings on them. So I just thought, better the devil you know. And it's not because this length means a whole lot. Somewhere around here I've got a cap. So what's effectively going to happen is a cap is going to go over the top with a spring. And I don't know, does the length of that mean anything to you? Does it matter if it was shorter? Are shorter ones okay? So I'm going to pop that down into the new one. You can see it fits quite beautifully, and if I just hold it for a second, I can feel spring tension on the needle. And I'll just go ahead and put the other 3 together before we drop them down into the carbs. All right, let's get these vacuum sliders into the carbs. Do you remember these puzzles when you were a kid? Triangle in the square hole, remember that? So it slides in pretty easily. You just got to remember to get the needle into the emulsion tube You try filming and doing this all at the same time. How are we doing? Can you see? I'm not making it, am I? Oh, I definitely missed that one. Never get it in the hole first time. Okay. Looking good. And so that is a vacuum slider in operation. I'll fit the other three rather than refitting these old crusty screws. I've treated it to some new ones with lock washers. When it comes to installing the caps, there's really not a lot to it. Make sure that this part of the diaphragm is well in place. You can pop your spring down and then spring into the cap, and then pop your cap down. You can screw it down. If you want to test it, it's going to be finger in and make sure that the diaphragm can move. It should sound like bellows. Hear that? Feels like bellows. A lot of people put too much information into seating the diaphragms, okay? As you put the cap down, the cap will spread the diaphragm and seat it, but if you haven't got this down and in place, the whole procedure is a fail. So that's not bad. And that is how to rebuild a bank of SC28 CBR 900RR carbs. Top job. Things to check before you consider reinstalling. Make sure that everything's nice and snappy. Treat yourself to some new rubber whenever you can, because the old ones were solid. And butterfly valves. Ensure that they all open together. What you don't want to see is, not great at this, what you want to see is all of them opening together. You don't want to delay or two open, then the other two, not even a slight increment. You want them to all open together and all close together. The adjustment for that is tiny little screws, which you can't see from this side. They are the little screw adjusters there. They're accessed from, oh, there's one up there, right up there. Can you see it? So you can kind of adjust the slack and make sure that all of the butterfly valves open together. I'm sure there's a few improvements I could have made on that process, probably leaving the choke assembly until absolute last. But yeah. If you can improve things, or you have a list of where to get parts from, in the comments below, it'd be really useful. Help share that information with the Honda community. So good. It sounds so good. Yes. Woo. Then he turns it off and walks away.